I just received an email with a spreadsheet attached, and I'm asked to review the data and provide some insights for my leaders to make decisions from. I'm like, okay, I'll do my very best. And I think what I'll use is a pivot table. Now, I've used pivot tables before a little bit. I've seen them, but boy, are they a mystery. I have trouble really identifying with what they're for, how they work, and most importantly, how am I going to use them in my job? Well, I open up the spreadsheet. I take a look at it. I've never seen the data before. And I then select the data, go to the insert menu, click on the pivot table, and then the anxiety starts. I look over on the right-hand side of my screen and I see these 4 boxes on the lower right corner of my screen. It's like, what do I do with these? And I start clicking fields and Microsoft starts making decisions for me. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to have to tinker with this thing until I figure it out. Any of that sound familiar? Do any of you have that situation when it comes to pivot tables? Let's use the chat and let me know if you can relate to that. If you're so new to pivot tables that you don't even know what I'm talking about, or perhaps you've experienced this and now you've grown past that and you already know how to use a pivot table, go to the chat and let me know, and welcome everybody. I'll wait to hear from you in the chat. My name is Tom Vorvis. I'm with Gravity Learning, one of the founders, and today we're going to learn about pivot tables. We're going to learn how to demystify those pivot tables. What does it mean by what do we mean by demystify the pivot tables? Well, we're going to take the mystery out of creating a pivot table. We're going to, by understanding, 1, what is a pivot table for? And then 2, how do we prepare our data, our spreadsheet, to where we make the pivot table process easier? Thank you, Greg. I know how to use pivot tables, but I'm sure there's a lot to learn. And that's for sure. And Angela, thank you for that as well. Be more efficient with them. And those of you who have never used pivot tables before, or at least don't have an experience with doing it well, this is going to be a great time for you. Gravity Learning, the goal is not just to learn, even though learning is half of our name. The goal is to use what you've learned. How many times have you gone to a workshop or a webinar to learn something new, and then within a day, a week, or a month, you forget it? Or if you don't forget it, you never actually use it because you don't take the time to do it. And then all of that time that you spend learning, this 55 minutes with me right now, is a waste. We don't want to make it a waste. So Gravity Learning is not about just learning. It's about using. We're going to use the way we learn as adults, the way we learn as professionals, by doing. Thank you for your comments, everybody. Most of us are doers. We learn best when we do. So today is a workshop. It's not simply a lecture from Tom. You're going to be working with me to do what I'm doing. You're going to build pivot tables with me. So I'd like you all to start straight away. In the chat, you'll see a document. It's an Excel spreadsheet. This is the sheet we're going to be using today throughout our 55 minutes together. And we're going to spend some time doing things together. But the best learning is when you get the 3 emphasis of what I like to refer to as the 3 Ds of learning. I'm going to discuss a need, a problem. I'm going to demonstrate the solution to that need or problem. And then you're going to go ahead and turn around and do it. How exciting is that? So you're going to get the full Gravity workshop methodology here today. And it's so nice to see all of your faces. Thank you all for turning on your video. Research shows conclusively that if you have your video turned on during a meeting, you're less likely to multitask. And if your video is turned off, you are 100% likely to multitask, which means you're not going to be getting everything you can get out of this workshop. So please, video, it would be great. Take advantage of the time we're here together. You've set aside 55 minutes. Let's get the most out of it as we can. Did you download the document? I see there's 17 of you here. I'd like to see 17 yeses, or if anybody has a no, let me know if you need any help. on downloading that document that's in the chat. And if you just arrived, I'm able to put that back in there for you and get you that document. Thank you all again for being here. And let's roll with our discussion together. I'm just so happy to be here with you all. So pivot tables, demystified. That's the goal, is to demystify your pivot tables. And to do so, we want to, first of all, get our mind around what a pivot table does. And the terms I'm about to share with you are logical terms, grouping and quantifying. But how do they fit together? That's what we're going to do. So, but a pivot table, let's put this definition in our mind right now. A pivot table is all about grouping and quantifying. And I'll just give you some overview of that. So when I say grouping, I'm looking at your wonderful faces on the video right now. And I see some of you are wearing glasses and some of you are not wearing glasses. So we could take the 17 of you, or 18, including me, and put us into two groups, those with glasses and those without. So that's an easy grouping. And that's what we do with our data. We look for commonality within our data, and we find that commonality. We then determine, does that commonality have business meaning, or is it just coincidental? Business meaning, like, for instance, if I were an optometrist, whether you wear glasses or not would mean something to me. You see, so we have business meaning behind our groups, like regional data or country data, or maybe product information. We can see grouping characteristics there. What's the opposite of grouping? Uniqueness, like a customer ID or a product ID. There's some uniqueness there. So that's number one. We're going to learn about groups today. It's got to be the most important thing we learn today. You might think, well, pivot tables are the most important thing. Well, pivot tables are an offshoot of grouping. We're going to learn about grouping, and then we're going to learn about quantifying as well. Quantifying, what is the total? What's the average? What's the sum? What's the count? So the aggregate, that's for sure. So one of the fun things we do that's amazing with our gravity learning workshops, I find amazing, is that we communicate with each other. I'm going to take a few moments here and put us all into breakout rooms. And I see there's 17 of you. So we're going to create 4 breakout rooms with 4 people each, or maybe 5. Let's go 5 breakout rooms. And there'll be 3 or 4 people in each breakout room. And this is what I'd like you to accomplish in your breakout room. And then you're going to benefit if you contribute. I want you to discuss a key question, everybody. Now, the key question is, what are the challenges you face when creating pivot tables? What are the data challenges you face when creating pivot tables? And you might be thinking, I don't even know what a pivot table is. So there's my first challenge. That's part of the discussion as well. We're going to have 4 minutes in the breakout room, and we're going to learn from each other. Some of you have got a lot of experience. Some of you are really new to this. So the question is, again, your discussion point. What challenges do you face when creating pivot tables? And it could be a cornucopia of challenges. And afterward, when you come back, we're going to take just a moment. We're going to select a few key people and ask you what you noticed, what you heard in your breakout rooms. And then we're going to move forward and show you all about grouping, quantifying, and how to build amazing pivot tables. So off you go. We'll see you back here in 4 minutes, everybody. It's, once again, what are the challenges you face when you build pivot tables? Here we go. See you in a few minutes. 4 minutes to be exact. Welcome back, everybody. I always like seeing the smiling faces when they get back. Breakout rooms are great because we get to discuss and learn from each other. And I'm going to just call on 2 of you. I'm going to go with the A's today. So Alita and Anna, I'd like, if you don't mind, to share what you've learned or what you heard or what you noticed in your breakout room. It doesn't have to be a blow by blow, just 30 seconds or less. And just tell us what you heard, learned, or just noticed during your conversation. Let's start with Alita.
Oh, for the 3 of us, we discuss about being here on this training. We want to learn new things. We have some basic knowledge, but we wanted to learn more, and that's why we are here on this training.
Right.
Learning more of about formulas and all about those groupings and summarizing data
Okay.
is what we are here for.
Wonderful. Very specific. And thank you for sharing that with me. And Anna, what did you hear or notice in your breakout room?
Hi. I noticed that same as Alita, we wanted to learn how to like work with pivot tables. Like me personally, I don't use them currently, but I am interested in learning the formulas and how to put one together. And in our breakout room, we also stated that we rely on Google
Right.
sometimes with these tables and stuff. But I was under the impression that in our group, we don't really use them currently. So
wonderful. Well, thank you for that insight, and
yeah,
all of you letting us know what your thoughts are on this, and sharing within the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are great, aren't they? I wish I had more time. This workshop is a 1 hour version or 55-minute version of our 2 hour workshop. It's conducted the same way, just condensed and shortened. And our next step together, everybody, is to answer those questions that came up during your breakout room. Pivot tables. What are they? They're a tool for grouping and summarizing or quantifying. And what does that really mean? What does that really entail? And let me give you an example of that. I had you download that file. If you didn't get the file, let me know in the chat, and I'll be glad to share the file with you again. But let's take a look at this file. And I know the screen might be a little small. You don't need to be able to read my screen. You have this spreadsheet on your screen. Let's take a look at this data. You've never seen it before prior to today, but you'll notice I've got Europe referenced many times in here. I might be interested in seeing, well, for Europe, I'd like to know what the total units are. And if you were to scroll through this list right now, friends, you'll see that it's over 50,000. Well, it's about 50,000 records long. For you to just very quickly say, Europe has this many units, or what's the average, it would take you a long time. And then the boss comes back and says, Tom, great, you've given me all the Europe total units, but can you break it down by country for me now? Like, oh, it sounded easy at first. Now it's gotten way more complicated. Well, would you all just take a look at my screen for a moment and let me demonstrate for you how easy it is to build a pivot table. Now, don't try to memorize what I'm showing you. I'm just showing off right now. So I'm going to click in the middle of my list. I'm going to choose Insert. On the Insert tab, you'll see there's a button labeled Pivot Table. I'm going to click on Pivot Table, and then just as easily, click on the OK button. Now I've got a pivot table. And remember what my question was? I'd like to know what are the total units per region. So I'm going to simply grab region, the field, drag it down to my rows box. We'll talk about this in a few minutes. And now you can see out of all my regions, out of all my data, there's only 7 regions, 50,000 rows broken down to 7 regions. And then I'll take my total units and put it into my values, my quantifier. And bada bing, bada boom, there, everybody. Boom, I can see my total regions, units, that quickly, that easily. 50,000 records, friends, just now, summarized in a matter of what? A moment? 10 seconds, 20 seconds? Now, again, I didn't ask you to memorize what I just did, but were you amazed? Were you flabbergasted by how quickly I was able to get to that data? I bet you would like to learn exactly how to get there, and we're not going to get there by simply having you repeat what I just did. What I'd like you to do now is to consider what are the key components that feed in to a pivot table that help us answer key questions about our data. First of all, pivot tables are easier. That analysis is easier when we have 3 things working for us. A well-formed list. Take that well-formed list and turn it into a table. That's optional. And then identify your groups. And we're going to walk through these 3 steps right now to make sure you're totally clear on this before we actually build our first pivot table. So what does it mean to have a well-formed list? A well-formed list is made up of three key things: a single row of headings, the data and the headings are contiguous, and it's optional to format it as a table. All right, Tom, I don't even know what these things mean. Well, we're going to share with you right now what these three things mean. So would you all please take a look at either my screen or take a look at your screen and open up that spreadsheet that I just had you download. Let's take a look, everybody, at the column headers. Our first part of a well-formed list is a single row of headings. What does that mean, a single row of headings? Well, let's show you what a single row of headings does not look like. Down here on these sheet tabs, we have a messy data tab. If I were to click on the messy data tab, you'll notice straight away that my headers are not in a single row. I'm using row 3 and row 4. And also, if you look carefully, you can see that we've got a couple other things going on here. A blank column, blank rows. That indicates that this is not a contiguous or adjacent data set. So let's review real quickly. A well-formed list, in other words, a list that's going to serve us well as a pivot table data source, has a single row of headings. Your sales tab represents that beautifully. And the messy data tab represents that poorly. The data is contiguous. In other words, there's no blank rows and no blank columns. This is going to make things easier. And then optionally, we turn that data set into a table. Now, when I say optionally, turn it into a table, let's all join me at your sales table, your sales tab, if you wouldn't mind, please, of the downloaded file. And let's all confirm. Do we have a single row of headings in row 4? Go to your chat and let me know. Give me a yes or a no. Do you understand? Yes, yes, yes. So we have a single row of headings. Beautiful. We can recognize that. Is our data contiguous? In other words, as you scroll through, don't bother scrolling through all 50,000 records, you'll see that there are no blank columns and no blank rows. That just makes things easier. It's not a requirement, but our goal is to make things easier. So what if you had messy headings or rows and columns that were blank? We'd want to get rid of that. We want to clean that up. Finally, the last step in preparing for our pivot table creation process is to turn this lovely list into a table. It's not a requirement, but I find it to be so much more helpful. Today, we're not going to bother with that requirement or that optional feature. It's not a requirement of turning it into a table. We're not going to bother with that, but I will tell you two benefits when you turn your list into a table. The first benefit is we get to name our table. So we say, okay, this isn't just A4 through I-50,000. No, we can name it and call it our sales table, or we can name it and call it our regions table. And a second benefit we get when we create a table out of our list is the table is self-sufficient. It grows and shrinks automatically as we add or remove data, and our pivot tables are updated automatically. So I know that's a side point, and I apologize for those of you who are brand new. You're probably thinking, Tom, I don't even know what you're talking about with these tables. Let's not worry about it. But those of you who are not so new to this, formatting your list as a table can bring you huge benefits. But for now, two characteristics of a well-formed list, friends. And the third is optional. Where did it go? It went right here. The third is optional. There we go. Single row of headings, data is contiguous, and now you're ready to build a pivot table. Let's test our knowledge. Would you go down to the bottom of the screen and click on the Practice tab? And those of you who like keyboard shortcuts, did you know if you hold down the Control key and use your page up and page down keys, Control, page up and page down will move you through your sheets so you don't have to click on them. Those of you who want to give it a try, feel free to. So if you hold down the Control key and use page up and page down, not the arrow keys, page up and page down, that'll move you through your sheets. Isn't that a cool little keystroke? Neat, right? So control page up and down moves you through your sheets. My question for you now is the practice sheet a well-formed list? Does it qualify as a well-formed list? And Kathleen, what about having blank rows at the top? Should you eliminate them? It's an amazing, very well thought out question, because so often you'll see data come to you where the data is on row 1, starting on row 1. I'm going to say that's probably the best place for your data, starting on row 1, but it's not a requirement. As long as the data is contiguous, like here on the practice sheet, we have a single row of headings and the data is all contiguous. That's exactly what we're looking for. Oops, I just told you the answer. So is the practice sheet a well-formed list? It is. It is a well-formed list. So Kathleen, very good question. Putting it all starting on A1 is perfectly fine as well. All right, friends, back to the sales sheet. Control page up will get you there quickly if you like keyboard shortcuts. We are now ready to build a pivot table. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. We still haven't identified what groups mean. What are groups all about? Tom, you keep talking about groups. We need to understand what groups really mean. So I'd like you to look at the column called Order ID. I've got a question for you. How many times should we see each order ID represented in this column? Think about that for a minute. How many times should I see this order ID right here represented in this column? Yeah, one time. Thank you, Gabriella. Exactly. One time. We don't want to ever see more than one of those in that column. That'd probably be a mistake. So if we were to group by order ID, we would wind up with 50,000 groups of 1, which is not grouping at all. Take a look at this column now called region. Do you see repetitive regions in here? Do you see it repeating over and over again? We do. Do you think that region has business meaning? In other words, do you think the business cares about the regions? Of course. Of course. So Tom, what are you getting at when you talk about business meaning? Here's a thought for you. What if I had a column called first name in this list? I don't, but what if I had a column called first name? Might there be more than one Tom or more than one Rob? There might be. Does that have any business meanings? Are we going to say, hey, all the Toms in the organization, I need you in my office straight away. We got something to discuss. Doesn't make any sense. So let's define what a group means. And I'm going to quiz you on this in a moment. A group means that we have data that repeats itself, has commonality, and has business meaning. There you go. So now we've identified a group. Has commonality and has business meaning. Would you go to the chat and tell me, repeat that to me, please? This is so important. What does grouping mean when it comes to pivot tables? Go to the chat and see if you can repeat it. What does a group really mean? Has commonality and has business meaning. And I know some have already typed that in, but I would like all of you to exercise that. It's proven science that when we engage, we're more likely to remember what we're here to learn. And this is the most important thing you're going to learn today. By far. If you don't understand groups, pivot tables are going to be a mystery. So I'm going to stop for a moment and ask all of you, do you have any questions? And I know that's a wide open statement. Do you have any questions? Any thoughts about what we're learning? Feel free to unmute or type your question into the chat. Or maybe just some thoughts about what you're learning. I'll take a sip of water while you think. I'll encourage all of you to think about that. If you have any questions along the way, and just let me know if you have those questions, and I'll definitely answer them as I can. And to elaborate on that, at the end of our session, I'm not going to be signed off and say, out of here. I'm going to stick around and answer your questions. So if you don't want to ask a question during the session, write it down so you don't forget, and catch me after the session. We'll talk about it together. All right, friends. Now that we have satisfied the key few components of what drives a pivot table, a well-formed list, single row of headings, contiguous, and we've identified our groups, it's now time for us to build a pivot table. Well, once again, Tom, once again, we're still not quite ready to build a pivot table because there are two types of groups. There's intrinsic groups and derived groups. Friends, I've been doing this for so many years. When Excel introduced pivot tables back in 1995, it was Excel version 5. I was so amazed by it. And I was amazed by the fact that we can use intrinsic groups or derived groups. So you might be thinking, Tom, what is an intrinsic group versus a derived group? Well, the intrinsic group is like region and country and category. That's already inside the list. It's ready to roll. We see the groups. A derivative or a derived group is when we take data from other data. Like, for instance, we have that column called total cost. We might have total cost or that total units and derive a group based on ranges, like from 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 50,000. We could create 3 groups called low, medium, and high. So we're deriving our groups from the existing data. And if you join us in our other workshops, our Power BI workshop, where we go into Power Query, we'll learn about derivative groups. But for today, we're going to concentrate on intrinsic groups. But if you're intrigued by deriving groups, look deep into your data set. Look deep into your data set and notice here, for instance, under order date. Order date, these are probably quite unique. You might see some duplicate data in there, but it's not groupable data. But if we were to extract the year and put a column over here called year of order, would we now have a derived group where we can group by year? Yes. So we're not going to do that now. But for those of you who have got a little bit more experience with pivot tables, you might be thinking, oh, that makes perfect sense, Tom. We need to create our own groupings sometimes. But we have a wonderful spreadsheet right here to build our pivot table from. So I know some of you have a smaller screen, some of you have 2 screens, some of you have a cockpit of 3 screens. I get it, so it's easier for you. So what we're going to do today for this first exercise is we're going to employ the 3 Ds of learning. I'm going to discuss something with you. That's how to create a pivot table. I'm going to demonstrate it for you, and then you're going to turn around and do it. And if you'd like to do it while I'm doing it, you're very welcome to. But remember, at the end of my discuss, demo, and do, I'm going to give you time to try it on your own, and I'm going to demonstrate it again. So you can sit back, relax, and just watch Tom do this, because you know you're going to get time to try it on your own. All right, Tom. All right, I'm ready. Are you ready to see how it's done? I'm excited. I'm going to start by clicking my mouse in my well-formed list. I'm going to make sure I'm sharing my screen appropriately. Earlier today, I was not. Can you all see my screen? Wonderful. I'm going to click my mouse inside of my well-formed list. I'll go to the Insert tab, and I'll choose Pivot Table. Now, at this point, when I choose Pivot Table, it's going to pop up and say, Tom, here's the range that we're suggesting you use. It's spot on. It's exactly what I noticed, what I needed. You might think, Tom, you didn't even select the range first, because it's a well-formed list. There's no blank rows, no blank columns. So right away, it knew my range. And then it's going to ask me, Tom, do you want to put this new pivot table on a new worksheet or on an existing worksheet? I'm going to choose new worksheet. When I click on OK, you'll notice I've made no changes in this dialog box. So step 1 was to click on Insert and then Pivot Table, and then just hit the OK. And you'll notice I get a new sheet to the left of the sheet I was on, and I have my pivot table. I'm going to delete that sheet now, and we're going to let you go try it on your own now. Go to the sales sheet, click inside the sales data, choose Insert Pivot Table, and click the OK. Using the chat, friends, would you all please let me know that you've arrived? Do you have what I see on my screen on your screen now? You've done the hard work now, friends. The hard work, thank you all, is identifying a well-formed list and the groups. We did that. Now we can build our pivot tables. Half of our workshop was getting ready. The other half of our workshop is doing it. All right, friends, here we are. I'd like you to notice that my active cell is inside this thing called a pivot table. And because of that, I see on my screen a design tab, a pivot table, an analyze tab, and a pivot table fields panel on the right-hand side. If I were to take my cursor now and click outside of the pivot table, watch my screen, friends. Those three things have disappeared. The pivot table analysis tab, the two tabs are gone and the panel is gone. If I were to click back inside my pivot table, they show back up. So give that a try. Again, we've removed one of those mysterious things about pivot tables. Why can't I find my tools? You've got to be inside the pivot table with your active cell to see those tools. Try that yourself now. Click in, click out, and watch those tools come and go. Have you had that mystery before? It's like, where are all those tools? Now we know why, because we weren't in the pivot table. Now, some of you, like myself, are compulsive closers. When I see an X and I say, I'm not using this, I'm going to close that. If you're a compulsive closer like me, you might wind up closing that panel. And if you close the panel, you told it what you wanted. You wanted to close that panel. So now when I click out, click in, that panel no longer shows up. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what did I just do? Well, we can fix that by clicking inside our pivot table and choosing our pivot table analysis tab, analyze tab, and you'll see the pivot table field list can be turned back on over here. So if you are like me and you close things all the time, you can get that panel back, which is the heart of building a pivot table. All right, friends, remember this field, this field, this field, and this field? Those were all columns that had grouping characteristics. Commonality with business meaning. Let's focus our attention down here now. I'd like to have you focus your attention on these two boxes. These two boxes in the pivot table called row and column. These two boxes are very special to our discussion, everybody. This is the second most important thing you'll learn today. Do you remember what the first important thing was? The first most important thing, go to the chat and tell me if you remember that. What was the first most important thing we learned? Can't wait to see you in the chat. Business need and commonality of, Kathleen, you're spot on. I'm looking for a keyword though. The business need and commonality. You nailed it with the word commonality. I've been using a different word, but that's spot on. Of the data. Good, good. Kathleen, you're getting there. Thank you. And grouping it. Yes. So business need of our groups, commonality of our groups. So the most important thing we've learned today is identify your groups. And if you don't have the groups you need, build them. All right. So now that we've got that, good job, Kathleen, and thank you. And everybody, these two boxes here, everybody, are for your groups. This is what we put in these two boxes. Now, oftentimes, if we're building a pivot table, if we're just new with this, we would hit these check marks and we let Microsoft make decisions for us. We're not going to use these check marks. These check marks can be used, but we want to move forward with intention. We want to do this with knowledge. So we're going to take our field like region and we're going to drag and drop it down into this grouping box called rows. Look at my screen. Look at my video, friends. Rows. These are rows. So we want our data to go down through rows and watch what happens when I take region and I drag it down into the rows box. Something magical is going to happen. Ready, set, I'm going to let go. Boom. Out of 50,000 rows, the pivot table says you have 7 unique regions, Tom. It's taken all those 50,000 rows and grouped them down into 7 unique regions. So listen up, friends. This is really key. I now have just determined a metric of my data that I didn't know prior to this. I now know there are 7 regions. Isn't that amazing? You wouldn't have known that without having to scroll through all of this data here on sales, sort it, and then go down and look, or group it and collapse the groupings. Oh my gosh, we didn't want to do that. Let the pivot table do it for us. So you notice I drug region down into the rows box. Now I'd like to know how many total units per region. So I'm going to grab the total units and drag it into the quantifier field called values. So out of the 50,000 rows, I can see the grand total broken down by each region. Was that amazing, or was that amazing? Let me show that to you again. I'm going to grab these fields that I drug down and just drag them out so I can show you how to do this yourself now. You might think, well, Tom, you could have just clicked those check marks. Yes, but I want to do this with intention. I don't want Microsoft to make the decisions for us. We are going to take a grouping column. We've determined this is a group because it has business meaning, like Kathleen said. Commonality by business meaning. We're going to drop it into a grouping box, which is the row box. How did I know it's a grouping column? Because I told you it's a grouping box. That's what it's for. Drag region down into the rows box, and then drag total units into the values box. Let's break this down further, friends. I'd like to know which category per region. So I'm going to take category now and drag it into the columns box. Watch what happens. So I have category C, category H, category L, and category M broken down per region. Amazing. Yes, this is what a pivot table does. When we understand groups and quantifiers, we can produce an amazing pivot table as we just did here. So now we can see the intersection for Europe. For category M, 15,856,866 units were sold under category M in Europe. Simply amazing. Let's take this one step further, everybody. I'd like to take category and drag it down here to solve what problem? Well, my list is looking a little bit wide. I'd like it to be a bit more vertical for printing reasons. I'm going to take category and drag it down here underneath region. So now we can see the categories underneath each region. The boss comes to us and says, Tom, I'd rather have it organized by category and then region. Well, it's just as easy to grab region and drag it underneath category. And now we have it category then region versus region then category. This is why we call it a pivot table. We can pivot the data around the core data around our ask here. So would you all please get your pivot table to look like Tom's on his screen? The rows contains the groupable data called regions. The columns contains the data called category. And then the values are the sum of total units. What do you think? I have, let's see, we have 15 of you here, 14 of you. Oh, we've lost 3 people. That's okay. Would you all please go to the chat and let me know if you have accomplished what we set out to do? Thank you all. Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, 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 yes. Done. Good. Of course, I'd like to ask you, do you have any concerns or questions right now before I test you? Well, we didn't know there's going to be a test. Of course, there's going to be a test. It's not really a test. It's going to be an exercise of your knowledge. I have a question for you. And that question is, what is the average cost per region? Now, before you do that, I'd like you to go to the practice tab. Look at this practice sheet. It's just a few rows, 20 or so rows. But for you to manually find out what the average cost is per region, it would take you minutes, maybe 5 minutes to figure that out, even though this sheet, this practice sheet is tiny. Look at it. It's a tiny little sheet. But I'd like you to tell us now, what is the average cost per region? And you're going to build a pivot table to tell us that. And I'm not going to walk you through it. You're going to do it on your own. What is the average cost per region? And I've given you some very basic steps. And the third step is you don't know how to do that yet. I'm going to show you how to do that third step. I haven't shown you yet. You might know how to do it, but I haven't shown you yet how to do that. So you're going to build a pivot table from the practice data sheet. You're going to drag the appropriate fields down into the grid. So I said average cost per region. So the cost and the region, which one of those two columns is going to be our grouping field that we put into the rows? Region or cost? Region, exactly. Thank you, Greg. Yes, Aisha, thank you. Perfect. Region. And then the cost, the total cost is going to go into which box? Down in the lower right corner, the values box. You're spot on. So let me have you watch my screen as I demonstrate the process. I gave you a chance to try it on your own, and thank you for doing it. Now I'm going to click my mouse in the middle of my well-formed list. I'll choose Insert Pivot Table. I'll click the OK, and I'll create a new sheet to the left of my practice sheet. Here now, I'm going to take region, grab it, and drag it down to my rows box. And then I'm going to take total cost and drag it into my values box. And now I'd like to change the default aggregate of sum to average. And it's done very easily by going to the small little drop-down arrow here where it says sum of total cost. Hit that little drop-down arrow and choose value field settings. And we can then change it to an average. Now we know the average cost per region. How easy was that? That was like a minute. And we had the answer that we needed. Let me show that to you again. I want the average cost and I want the sum. And I'd like to know what the percentage is of the total. So I'm going to start this process over. So a repetition is a great teacher, isn't it, everybody? Repetition is a great teacher. Watch my screen, everybody, as I repeat this exercise. And we're going to add a bit more to our pivot table. I'll choose Insert Pivot Table, and I'll click the OK. And the need here, the problem is I need to know what the average cost per region is, total cost, and also what the percentage is of each region for the cost. So I'm going to grab region and drag it down to the rows box. I'll put total cost into the value, and I know for a fact that my boss is going to want the total as well as the average. So I'm going to put total cost down there again in the values box. This is the one I'm going to change to average. Value field settings, average. And then I'm going to drag total cost down there again. I'll hit the small drop-down arrow and choose value field settings again. I'll choose show value as a percent of grand total. I'll show this to you again in a moment. Now I have my percentage of grand total. This is looking nice, but not as nice as I'd like. So I'm going to select my data and format it as currency. Yeah, I like comma better. Beautiful. Gaze at the beauteousness of this wonderful pivot table that shows me the total cost, the average cost per region, and then the percentage of cost per region adding up to that 100%. Hey friends, we've got about 5 more minutes. We're ahead of schedule here. So I'd like you to take 1 minute and see if you can accomplish what I've just shared with you. I drug total cost into the values box 3 times, use the little drop down arrow and change the value field settings. And each time I chose the different aggregate, average, And then I went up to the top and chose show value as, and I said a percent of grand total. There are so many cool little hidden features within the pivot table by using that little drop down arrow on the fields down in the value box, or you can right click and get the same results on your pivot table by right clicking. So many really, really cool features here, friends. You know, Gravity Learning, we pride ourselves on being on time. It's such an important characteristic of a meeting. We said this is a 55-minute workshop. The first 5 minutes, of course, is introduction and getting us prepared. So we've got about maybe 6-7 minutes left of our time together. I'd like to spend a few minutes showing off. What do you think? We'll learn some nice new features by me just showing off. And before I do, let's take 20 seconds, go to the chat, let me know, were you successful of creating a lovely pivot table that looks like I need to see the third column again. You got it, Kathleen. Anybody else? How did you do the percentage? Nice. So same question, Lori. Wonderful. I'm going to share that with you right now. To show the percentage, I'm just going to do it again. I already have it in there, but I'm just going to add another column by taking my total cost, dragging it down, and putting it into my values box. I'll drag it on down there. I now have this drop down arrow here where I will choose value field settings. After choosing value field settings, you'll see all of the standard aggregates here. And there's also a show value as. That's where we find it. We click on the show value as, and then we hit this small drop down arrow where it says no calculation, and we instead choose percent of grand total. We click the OK, and now we have the percentage of the grand total. Kathleen, Lori, how do we do? Got it? Nice. Nicely done, everybody. All right, so let me take a moment. Kathleen, you might not need to remember, because not only do we have a shortcut sheet for you that'll be sent out after our workshop, we also have this video is going to be recorded and you can play it back. And you'll get a link to it as well. Wonderful. So like I said, we're going to take a minute or two and show off. I've got my sales data. Here's the goal. The business has asked me to create a visual representation of this data. We're curious about the total units across all of our regions. We'd like to have some kind of visual representation of that so that it's easy for us to present it in our next presentation. So I'm going to start a pivot table, insert pivot table, and you don't have to do this with me. Remember, this is show off time. I'll click OK, and I'll take my region and put it down in the rows. I'm thinking that they're going to also want this broken down by channel. And then I'm also going to then take the total units, put in the values. I'm liking what I'm seeing here, but I know that the format is not very nice. So instead of clicking and dragging over it and formatting it, I'm going to right mouse click and choose format number. And you notice when I right clicked, I didn't bother highlighting first. I'm going to format this as currency, hit the OK. Notice what it did? It formatted my data as currency automatically throughout the whole table. I didn't even have to highlight it. Some of these tables get really large. So right-clicking and choosing format number applies to the whole table. Now, the next step, what I'd like to accomplish is to make this visually appealing. So I'm going to click in the middle of my new pivot table, and I'll choose Insert. And I'm going to do a comparison. So I'm going to do a chart, a column chart. And I'll choose the first column chart. And you'll see straight away, I get a nice pivot table chart known as a pivot chart. Now, I'm not done yet, because I know for a fact that the business is going to want to know how this breaks down per category. So instead of using the category in the legend or the axes of our data set or in the rows or columns, I'm going to put category in the filters. Now the filter again is another grouping box. So these three boxes are all about grouping fields. And I can now take my new filter, as you see up above here, and say, show me just my L's, category L. Ding! It shows you just my category of L's. And you'll notice every time I change, this is for you more advanced users, every time I change my filter, my column widths keep switching back to the way they were. Do any of you find this to be annoying? I hate that. So all you have to do is right click on your pivot table anywhere and choose pivot table options. And then we can turn off the auto fit column widths on update. There's a lifesaver right there. Let's do that again. I'm going to right click on my pivot table, choose pivot table options, and turn off the auto fit. So now when I adjust my filter, my pivot table does not change its column width. That right there was worth the whole 55 minutes, wasn't it? Well, we're not done yet. I've got one more minute to share with you, friends. Up on the Insert tab, I'm going to insert a slicer. And notice the slicer fits into the category of filters. I'm going to insert a slicer, and we're going to slice based on channel and category. It puts in these nice little visuals here called slicers. And these slicers, my friends, are pivots, pivot filters. So I can easily click on my online. Now I'm seeing just my online. Offline, clear the filter. See my H categories, my C categories, my M categories, clear the filter. Is that cool or what? So slicers give me the ability to use filters without these annoying little drop downs up here. So yes, indeed, I can get rid of my filters and use my slicers. And those of you who are intrigued by slicers, I'll show you one more cool trick with the slicer. You select the slicer, go to the slicer menu, and change it to a 2-column slicer, and then change its color to be green. Change this to a 2-column slicer, and let's make that one red. And thank you all for being here with me for orange and learning more about pivot tables. I hope that you all got something important and meaningful out of our exercise today. And remember, friends, schedule some time today or tomorrow or Monday, a half an hour. Put it on your calendar right now to revisit what we've learned here today.